good, they got a bit distracted and they got a bit excited by things that their neighbours were doing and the idols and the stone statues and things that they worshipped. And they'd stop talking to God and they'd stop following God. And things would dip, and then there were all these other nations living around them really didn't like them, and they'd come in and they'd raid them and there'd be wars, and then the people of God would go, oh, when we follow God, things are better. Let's go back to following God. And honestly, the book of Judges is like this downward spiral of following God, not following God, following God, not following God. And it just gets worse and worse. And as you go through the story, you can see God's people, as they keep forgetting God, everything begins to decline. The economics, the politics, the way they treat women, that's the story for another day. It just goes down and down and down and down because they keep forgetting who God is. They keep forgetting to follow him. They keep choosing to do something different. And so this story fits somewhere towards the beginning of that decline. Because what God does, they don't have kings in this time, they're given judges. Leaders who step in. It's not some hereditary kingship that gets passed down. People who are raised up as leaders of the nation. People who will pass messages from God on to his people, dispense wisdom and lead armies. And actually, Deborah comes as about the fourth of the judges. If we go on one slide, there we are. It says in Judges 2, then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of the raiders. So these other nations that would come in and take and steal and plunder. And you get 4 in quite quick succession, and we don't know that much about most of them. We get Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, and then we get Deborah. And Deborah is who we're going to look at today. Because Deborah is already unexpected, because Deborah is a woman. And this is a time, 4,000 years ago, in the Middle East, where all of the, cultural expectations that you would expect to be in that part of the world now were well and truly in force. People did not expect women to lead. Women did what they were told. Women did what their husbands told them. Women believed what their husbands believed. Women laughed at their husbands' jokes. Women did what their husbands said, or their fathers said, depending on what stage of life they were at. But Deborah is quite somebody. So if we jump forward a couple of verses, or a couple of chapters actually, Judges chapter 4 is where this story kicks off. And it says this, now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. Side note, there's lots of long names in here. I may not be pronouncing them right, so don't quote me or use me as your guide for this. And if you're somebody who all those names start confusing you, I actually had ChatGPT make me a little map. It made me very excited. But they're just there. They're actually not that important, but if you're somebody who likes them, they're there so you can remember them. But there's some things in this verse that are important to notice, and some things that aren't in this verse that I think are important to notice. We get introduced to Deborah. She's a prophet. She's the wife of Lapidoth. Now that tells us 2 things about her. Okay, she's a prophet. She's someone who hears from God, which is interesting. That means that God also speaks to women. That is good news for women on International Women's Day. And she's the wife of Lapidoth. So she's introduced. She actually comes first, which is interesting. But they do mention her husband. It's helpful to know he never gets another mention in the rest of the story. He's not key to this story. He's not quietly behind the scenes telling her what to do. He's not actually, she's not just like a puppet prophet doing what her husband says, hearing the message from her husband and then passing it on to the people. He's there, but he's not key. He's not even given as the reason why it's okay for her to be a prophet. She's not allowed to lead because her husband's a leader. And there's some other stuff that isn't in here. There's no excuse for why Deborah's allowed to be a woman and lead. There's not God made an exception this time in the middle of the judges and allowed a woman to lead. There's none of that. This story is written thousands of years ago, written down for us to, have all these years later, and it's just taken for granted that Deborah was a prophet. She happened to be married to Lapidoth, and she was leading Israel at that time. She wasn't just a prophet who sat in a hut somewhere that somebody occasionally went for consultation. She was leading Israel. It's just there, in all of its language, to be seen and to be heard. And the fact that that's who she was a judge, she was a prophet, it means she's trusted. It means she's respected. It means people come to her to solve their problems. When they don't know what to do, when they don't know the way to follow God, when they don't know how to sort out their disputes, it's Deborah that they go to. She has an enormous role in this society, in this nation. And that is something that we can hold as a model for young women, for old women, for middle-aged women, to know that if that was okay for Deborah all of those years ago, well, it must be okay for us now. But we'll hold that in our heads and we'll continue the story. In fact, we're going to go back a little bit in the story because the verses I just read said in that time. But we're going to go back to see what that time was. We're just going to jump back a couple of verses. And the verses before say this. They say, Sisera, the commander of the army, was based in Harosheth-Hagoyim, because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. And so they cried to the Lord for help. So, lots of long names. Sisera is essentially like the Lord of the Nazgûls. Like, he is the one who rules, who like commands the army. He's the one. He's the cruel enemy. He's the one who steps in that everyone is terrified of. He's the one that if he comes onto the battlefield, people quake with fear. Armies retreat at his thing. Like this is terrifying. And there's some things in this verse that we don't notice nowadays. And actually, as I was sitting down earlier and I was thinking about all of the news headlines at the moment, I was thinking, do you know what? This feels even more close to home at the moment, when in this part of the world another war is brewing, another war is taking place, and we have an army, the American, army that has all of this might, all of this superior armament. Like they've got planes that nobody else can even detect. They've got bombs that are bigger than anybody else. They've got satellite technology. They are so technologically advanced that truthfully, nobody else really stands a chance against them, do they? And we don't need to get into the politics of that right now, but that's just a fact. Like, America has the best, biggest, strongest fighting army in the world, and nobody really wants to have to fight them. Like, that's just true, isn't it? And there's something in this verse that says that actually Sisera's army was the same. As it says, he had 900 chariots fitted with iron. And that doesn't mean very much to us nowadays. But 3,000 years ago, they were the technologically advanced army. They were the ones, 900 chariots fitted with iron. Israel, truthfully, had a bit of a ragtag bag of peasant soldiers, who turned up with a spear. It's not long after this that we get the story of David and Goliath, and David's turning up with his, slingshot and his stones. This is not an even battle. The enemy are powerful. They have strength, and they've been oppressing the people of God for 20 years. And what that looked like was something that we can perhaps imagine if we look to parts of the world that we live in now. In fact, there's a theologian, Tokunbo Adeyemo, who says this. He says, those who live in war-torn regions of Africa will recognize the types of disruption of normal life that is described in this part of the Bible. You could imagine it. But what it really was like in those days, it got so bad that nobody really dared walk down the streets or the roads between towns, because it wasn't safe. So if you had to go, and it would have been like a Foreign Office travel advisory, only travel if necessary. But if you have to go, don't walk down the road, because if Sisera's guys come past, you're done for. People would have gone down, going between the bushes on the side of the road. Women definitely would not have been travelling. They would not have been safe. Violence against women and girls has been going on for a long time. Their houses were being raided, their goods were being taken, their children were being taken. This was a terrifying time. No wonder the Israelites finally remembered to cry out to God. And God hears them. If we continue through the story in Judges chapter 4, verse 6, it says this, Deborah sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go. Take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, that's 2 of the tribes of Israel, and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army," so he's the king of the enemy, "with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and I'll give him into your hands." What a message. What a message from a God who's been ignored for 20 years by his people, but he hears their cries and his compassion continues. There's this phrase that I've come to love, like God's goodness is not dependent on us. God's goodness isn't dependent on us. So even when we ignore him, even when we go chasing after other things, even when we forget who he is, even when we don't talk to him, God's compassion remains the same. His goodness remains the same. And it does now, and it did back then. And he's got a plan. And he sends this beautiful, reassuring message through his prophet Deborah to the commander of the army. But this is what Barak says when we go to the next verse. It says, Barak said to her, "If you go with me," so he's talking to Deborah, "I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go." So he's heard the good news, he's heard the message from God, and he's standing there going, "Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure because Sisera's army, they are frightening. And they've got, chariots clad with iron. Doesn't mean anything to me. But back then, that was terrifying. That was a terrifying thought. And his words are, "I'm not going if you don't go with me." And he's had a really bad press about this. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But he gets a really bad press for being a wimp. What's wrong with Barak? Why won't he go and fight? Why does he need a girl to go with him? That's the way this story gets told. What's wrong with Barak? And he's like, "I'm not going." But I think, to be fair to him, the reality is he knows what the odds are. He knows he's taking this band of nobodies up against these really massive somebodies and saying, "We're going to fight them in their ironclad chariots with our slingshots and spears and a little bit of armour if we're lucky." And what he must also know is that's 10,000 men who might never come home. If this isn't right, if this isn't God talking, this is going to be terrible. That's 10,000 men who won't come home. That's 10,000 families who are going to lose their dad or their son or their brother. This will decimate the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali. This will be terrible. And he really wants to know that God is with him in this. And Deborah represents that for him. As he says, "Deborah, will you come with me? Because you've carried this message from God to me. You're my commander, you're my leader, and if you come with me, I will feel that much more confident that I am not leading my men into a suicide mission. I will feel that much more confident that God comes with me because I know that God is with you." And that's actually quite extraordinary when you stop and you think about it. I don't know that he's a wimp. Maybe he's just a wise man who's seen the way that things go. Maybe he's not just a man with no faith and a bit of a wuss. Maybe he cares about the men under his care and he wants to make sure. And he knows that Deborah represents certainty. Deborah represents the presence of God with that army. And he asks her to come with him. And so she says, "Certainly I'll go with you," said Deborah. "But because of the course that you're taking, the honour will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." And so Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. So there's consequences for Barak. He's not going to get all the glory. He's not going to get all the kudos of the battle. And let's be honest, he really hasn't had it. It's the way this story gets told. But Deborah steps up. She's not just a judge who sits under a tree dispensing wisdom. She's not just a lady sitting in the corner, basking in the presence of God and occasionally sharing it with other people. She's a warrior. She's going to lead this army into battle against the most frightening enemy of the time. She is extraordinary. She's a model for all of us. And then the story continues. When they told Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera summoned from Harosheth-Hagoyim to the Kishon River all of his men and his 900 chariots fitted with iron. And then Deborah said to Barak, "Go. This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you. And that is all the Israelites need. They need to know that the Lord has gone ahead, that they're following in his footsteps, that they're following the Lord their God, that they're doing what he calls them to. And that's a message for all of us. Sometimes the enemy looks frightening. Sometimes the challenge, it's not even an obvious enemy, it's just a big, fat, scary thing to do. What if I look stupid? What if I die? Like, what if? We can think of all of the what ifs. But when we know that the Lord has gone before us, then we can follow him and we can step into the path that he's laid out for us. So that's what happens. And if we pick up the story in verse 15, it says this: At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all of his chariots and army by the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot. That is a very short version of the story. It goes from Barak went, Sisera ran away. Like, a lot's happened in between. In fact, if you go to the next chapter, it gives more detail. There's this beautiful song that Deborah sings of like celebration afterwards. But fundamentally, what we discover is that the Lord went ahead and made it rain. And the river rose. And the area in the floodplain became so boggy that those chariots, clad with iron, and all of the weight that they carried got stuck literally in the mud. And they became useless. And what had been their strength became their stumbling block. And it's extraordinary how God is able to do that, how he's able to take somebody's weakness and make it something that they actually are able to lead out of going forwards, but also he takes the enemy's strength and he turns it into their weakness. It's an incredible moment when actually he doesn't have to, pump muscles into the Israelites. He doesn't have to turn them into Power Rangers. Like, he doesn't have to do anything like that. God just shows up and he takes the strength and the might of the enemy and he turns it into their weakness. And the Israelites prevail and Sisera runs for the hills, but not entirely the hills, to the tent of Jael. Now she is the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was an alliance between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. So here's the thing. Heber's a traitor. Heber's a collaborator with the enemy. Now, my family often travels to a little town in France called Le Grand Bonnand. It's up in the Alps, near the border with Switzerland and Italy. And it's a really, really beautiful place in the winter and in the summer. But up on the mountains, up on the cliffs, is something called a Via Ferrata. And the Via Ferrata is like this, it literally means like an iron way. And it's all these little handholds and footholds that have been made of iron and pushed into the cliffs. And nowadays, people who aren't as scared of heights as me, I am never doing it, right? But my children have done it. You can go climbing, and there are rope bridges, and you can climb the cliffs, and you can go around, and it would make me think I was dying. But other people love it. But it's the roots that were put in nearly 100 years ago by the French resistance, smuggling in arms for the resistance who were going to fight the Nazis. There's these extraordinary pathways that enabled people to resist the enemy, to fight back, to do little acts of terrorism. But in the same village, there were people whose choices, actually I can understand, who chose that the safest route was not to go up the Via Ferrata, not to be part of the resistance, but just to make things easy, just to keep their heads down, to collaborate, to allow the Germans to come and eat in their house, to shop in their shop, to do the things that they needed to do. And one of the stories from after the war really sits heavy on me, because this town, and it's just a small little town up in the mountains, got absolutely divided by those who resisted and those who collaborated. And after the war, the village rounded up the collaborators, took them into the woods, and shot them. Like, this stuff matters. This stuff sits at the core of communities. Are you with us, or are you against us? And Heber's a collaborator. Heber has been disloyal to his nation, to his people, and it's his house that Sisera is so confident that he can run to, that he goes and he hides. And Heber's not there, but Jael, his wife, is. And so the story continues that Jael went out to meet Sisera, and she says to him, "Come, my lord, come right in, don't be afraid." And so he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." And she opened a skin of milk, gave him a drink, and she covers him up. How hospitable. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone in there?' say no." And there's an invitation to collaborate for Jael. And she feeds this man, and she lays him down, and she covers him with a blanket. Sisera finds refuge. He finds a warm welcome. Until, as we go on to the next verse, it says this: "But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer, and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple